Hey folks, good to see you again. I have been, as you, I'm sure, very busy over the semester, and I'm sorry I didn't get to upload more videos for you. I am really happy with the work I've been getting from you though, and I just want to take a minute to review what's coming up here in the next week, the final week, some reminders about how to approach your revisions. At this point, you have written several poems, you've worked on aspects of fiction and aspects of the creative nonfiction genre, and I hope you've found out how each one of these genres kind of support and strengthen the other genres if you're using the tools of craft that we've studied during the course. Um, so what I want to start out today with, though, is just reminding you about how you may want to look at your poems and what to look for in the revision process and what to look at in your fiction and your creative nonfiction pieces when it comes to revising and getting it ready for the final portfolio to turn in to me. In about 4 or 5 days. So again, remember, it's important to read the poem out loud to yourself we're going to start with poetry. So when you're going through your poem and you want to look at all the past comments that you've gotten from me and from your classmates, and then as you revise your poem, because I'm looking for some strong changes to be happening between poems. So I want to see previous versions of the poem too. But we'll talk about that in a second when it comes to putting the portfolio together. So again, try to consider the poem as a dramatic situation. It addresses an audience or another character. You can kind of identify like who's speaking, and the reader should be able to identify who's speaking and what are the conflicts or ideas in the language that's being used in the poem. So what about the larger issues having to do with the poem? You need to remember to ask yourself what's being dramatized. What conflicts or themes does the poem present? Who is the speaker? You want to describe, in your own mind, whose voice is being used here, right? What is the mask? What is the persona that is speaking the poem, and who is the audience, and to whom are they speaking? There may be speaking to other voices in the poem. What is happening in the poem? Consider kind of the narrative, the plot, as it were. How's it dramatized? And when does the action occur? What kind of action is in the poem? When is specifically chronologically, what day, what year, what time? Where is the speaker? Do we have a clear idea about where the poem is taking place? And finally, why does the speaker, the speaker of the poem though, which is again the persona that you're using, why does the speaker in the poem feel compelled to tell this particular narrative or to speak about this moment, right? What is the motivation in it? Remember that poem is, the poet's form is intricate to the meaning of the poem, and so depending on if you're using formal or free verse, how are the lines broken? How are the rhymes and the meter working together to support the action and the theme of the poem? What is the rhetoric? How is the speaker making particular statements? Consider kind of the predicates and what they reveal about the speaker. What kind of syntax? Consider the subjects, the verbs, the objects, and the voice itself, right? You have voices that are more formal voices, and then you have more colloquial voices. So the voice you may be using just to speak to your friends, or the voice you use to speak to your mother or father, or sister or brother or other family members, or the voice you may use to speak to an authority figure, right? Those are all different voices that we use when we're actually having conversations with those people. And then vocabulary, diction is highly important. The word choices are going to make a huge difference. Try to stay away from archaic languages, meaning we don't want the poem to sound like it was written in the 17th or 18th or 19th century, like it's an Elizabethan poem or a poem that's being written by Edgar Allan Poe, right? That's not the way that people write contemporary poems nowadays. Okay, look for any patterns that are in your poems that you can support and even maybe work with to again heighten the meaning of the poem. Rhyme, patterns of sound, visual patterns, rhythm and meter, all these are important to the meaning and the effect of the poem. So those are the main points that I wanted to remind you of when it comes to reviewing your poem and getting it ready for the final revision. And you may have, 2, 3, 4. I hope you have at least 3 revisions in your poems. But at the very minimum, you need to have 2 revisions. I say 3 because the first draft is really a rough draft of the poem, and same with the stories too. The second draft is where you've gone through and you've really tried to kind of make some global changes in the poem. Try to figure out really how you can structure the poem and structure the meaning of the poem in such a way as to make it pop, make it snap, make it really have an effect on the reader and seem real and organic. So that's the second draft, and then you want to go through and do a third draft on it, where you're going through and really kind of with fine-tooth comb, looking at particular words, looking at line breaks, looking at stanza breaks. Experiment a little bit. Don't be afraid if you've written the poem in 5-line stanzas. Try breaking it up into 2-line stanzas. Try breaking it up into 4-line stanzas and see what it looks like. See how it reads after you do that. And even the breaks, the line breaks in the poems. If you're breaking at a less important word, an article, let's say, a, and, the, or a preposition of, in, out, are those the effect of ending the poem, the line on those words? They're going to have the effect that you would like to have on the reader, because remember, the first word and the last word in each line are going to really kind of stand out for the reader, and so those should carry some importance when you're thinking about putting the poem together. Okay. So the next thing that I'd like to kind of cover is how about your fiction and your creative nonfiction. So I'm going to speak to both of these because even though a lot of you in your creative nonfiction used a lot more summary, which is it's much more easier to get away with using a lot of summary in the creative nonfiction piece than it is in fiction pieces. You still want to focus on where can you use all those other elements of craft, fiction craft, and poetic sound in your creative nonfiction piece. So, as we covered before, you want to think about the arc of the story. The way that you've put the story in such a way as there's a single moment in the character's life. So, in a fiction piece, you'd have your main character, the protagonist, and in a creative nonfiction piece, you are the main character. So looking at yourself as the main character allows you to get some distance, though, if you kind of look at yourself as a character in that memoir piece. But what is the single moment in the character's life that culminates in a defining choice? A choice where nothing will be the same again, where it will change the way they look at life. And it doesn't have to be huge changes. I'm not saying that they have to do a 180 in their life, but something to where they realize or recognize something human in the endeavor in which they have been engaged. Look at the patterns of power in the story and how those patterns of power can go back and forth from the antagonist to the protagonist. And even in the creative nonfiction piece, the memoir, what is the pattern of power in those stories? And usually that is some challenge that the main character or the narrator is struggling with, and that struggle can be internal or external or a combination of the two. And especially in fiction, the combination of the two is very important. But even in creative nonfiction, the best creative nonfiction pieces and memoirs are where those two things are happening. So the outer story, the actual elements that are happening, the action that's happening in the story is also dovetailing in with the internal conflict that the character is experiencing in order to kind of come to that new realization. And don't forget about looking at the stories as a kind of connections and disconnection. Again, these patterns kind of pulling us in and pushing us away, going back and forth, whether it's power or connection. Those are kind of always creating a tension in the story that you'd like to try to promote. So and remember how important the character is. The main characters are vitally important, and even the supporting characters. Be sure to, when you introduce your new characters, give us some kind of immediate description of the character, of their physical traits, and maybe even their movement. So when, let's say you're writing the story and you come to a point in the story where the main character has met up with a friend. When they meet up with that friend, you may say, John stepped into the room, period. He was about 6 foot tall and weighed 210 pounds, but he had a certain way in his look that made you feel like you could always trust him. There's something in the eyes, the way they would drill through and get to the core of who you were, period. And then kind of go on with the story, then go on with the action, and then keep pulling in these little details about the character as the conversation is going on, as the action is going on. Make sure that you've developed some credibility with the main character in the sense of how much can the reader trust that main character. In order to do that, you can't just assume that your readers know everything about that main character or about their views of everyone else. So if you start a story out and you start judging everyone else in the story and throwing judgments out at the reader, well, they don't even know really who the main character is. And so they don't know if they could trust that main character's judgment or not at that point. So we have to have a little bit of an idea of who that main character is and what their personality is before we can start trusting that their judgment is the kind of judgment that we would want to follow, just as the same when we meet somebody and make a new friend. So we also want to think about the purpose, again, of the story. What's the point we're trying to make? And we want to look at some complexity that's going on in the story, that it's not just a kind of stereotype, cliched story that we've heard over and over and over again. I mean, every story is going to be have elements of other stories we've heard, but as a creative writer, the focus on creative, that means we are making something that hasn't been made before. We're creating something new. So look for that way of showing us the complexity and the change in the character. And in order to do that, you may want to think about what is the challenge for the character, and then what are the consequences of these challenges that the character is going through. One of the really important things that I want to remind you of is paying attention to setting. Setting is so vitally important. So when you start a new scene, whether it's in your fiction story or your creative nonfiction story, you really need to set us up in the place. We need to have a feel for the room, for the building, for the mountains in which the hike is taking place of your story. Let's say your story is about a couple of characters going on a hike, or your characters are meeting at a swimming pool, or they are lying on the beach. You want to describe that setting and in some ways and in poetic detail. That's where the poetry a lot of times can come in, the imagery that we would use, the abstractions, names or concepts, which you can't be experienced through uh, 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 through just intelligence. Instead, we have to experience them some way through our senses, and you have to then bring those senses to life so you can set up the tone and the mood of the story. The overcast sky, the color of the trees, the drabness of the room or the brightness of the room. Describing the details of those places are going to help put the reader in the right mood to reveal the character and advance the action forward. And it's really important to reveal that character through setting and advance the action. Okay. Try to stay away from kind of generalizations, and I kind of mentioned this before, generalizations and judgments as much as possible. As you often hear, show, don't tell. So it gives importance to speaking about the concrete, significant details, right? Concrete, significant details. So significant meaning specific images that suggest an abstraction or a generalization or a judgment. So they suggest love or hate or pity or any of these kind of abstract terms that we need to somehow concretize as we're writing the story. What is the point of view? Do you want to play with that point of view a little bit? You might want to try to rewrite the story in third person. You may have written it in first person, and now you're going to say, well, let me try it in third person and see what happens. Let me try an omniscient POV. In today's contemporary world, we don't use a lot of omniscient. That was, a couple hundred years ago. They used it a lot, and before. Now it's much more first person, maybe third person. Limited omniscient, meaning that that one character, you get a point of view from one character's point of view, but you don't see the direct point of view of every character in the story. The other characters are brought about through an omniscient voice that's speaking in third person about them. And then finally, don't forget to use good, strong dialogue, right? It helps to color the tone and the scene, particularly if their voice is interesting and original, and it sounds to us like other people we could relate to, in the sense of we've met a lot of people who speak in many different colloquialisms, and their tone of voice is a much different tone of voice from someone from New Jersey than there is from someone from South Georgia, than there is someone from Canada or Spain or Germany. So be sure to play around with that too. And it helps to supplement the setting, and it also, of course, reveals the character. So those are the main points that I want you to think about as you're going through the revisions of your poem and your story and your creative nonfiction piece, the memoir. So the last thing I want to talk about is portfolio, and as it states in folio. The final portfolio is really kind of a way to show me and yourself kind of how much you have learned during the course. And you'll do that by showing me these perfectly revised creative nonfiction piece with revisions. So let's say if you have 3 revisions of your creative nonfiction piece, well, then I want to see all 3 of those versions of it. Okay, and so and you can upload them all as separate documents if you want. So what I'd like you to do, though, is to label them, creative nonfiction or memoir 1, memoir 2, memoir final, right? And the same with the fiction piece. 1 perfectly revised fiction piece with revisions, so that would be fiction 1, fiction 2, fiction 3. You can put your last name before it too, so maybe Morris Fiction 1, Morris Fiction 2, Morris Fiction 3 if I was turning it in. And then the same with the poems, right? So show me all the revisions. I'm going to be looking at your first draft, the first piece that you handed in your poem, and then poetry, and then I'm going to be looking at the changes you make between. And a good part of what I'm judging here is how much you worked in between the drafts to improve your piece so that it comes together in the end. And then I want you to finish off with a 2-page that's minimum, so you can write more than 2 pages, okay? And 2 pages, 2 complete pages. I would to be sure I got 2 complete pages, I would probably go into the 3rd page at least to make sure it's not, if it's 2 3/4 pages, I mean, it's 1 3/4 pages, that's not 2 pages, and you will not get the best grade on it if you do that, all right? But a 2-page reflection of what you learned in the semester. Please be specific. Use material from discuss material from the lectures, the handouts, the book, the videos, everything that you use here, maybe touch on. Think of the portfolio as your kind of proof of your professional readiness, that you're ready to move on to the next level of writing, more advanced level where you're specializing in poetry, or you're specializing in fiction, or you're specializing in creative nonfiction. Finally, I just want to say thank you so much for all the hard work you did this semester. I know after first half, I was not able to get in here and put these videos together as much as I wanted to, but you guys did a great job. I really have some talented people in this class. I hope that I get to work with some of you again. It would be a pleasure. It's always my privilege to work with creative writers. It's the love of my life, and so I hope to see some of you down the line, and I know I'm going to see some of your work in print as you move on through your work at the university and beyond. So thanks again for a great semester. If you have any questions, again, feel free to email me, and I will get back to you as soon as possible on any emails. And I hope you have a great summer. Be safe, be sane. If you can't be either one, then at least have some fun. Okay? So take care. Thanks so much.